Good evening, Rotarians, Rotaractors, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I hope everyone is having a good Monday wherever they are, and I welcome you to this Rotary session this evening. To start, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ivy Mumo. My title is given as entrepreneur, and I was having a discussion yesterday, and I was like, I'm really not an entrepreneur, but I have attempted the entrepreneur journey, and the person I was having the discussion with said, you know, it's like an alcoholic. You just say you're a recovering alcoholic. So I am a recovering entrepreneur. I have dealt a lot with different startups and a lot of entrepreneurs, friends, family, businesses. And I come to this panel today as your moderator. And I look forward to having a good evening, a great discussion with you. So before I introduce our panelists, just a few house rules, if you may. We'll let all the panelists introduce themselves, and then I will be taking them through a series of questions. If you'd like to ask a question during the discussion, I request that you type it on the group chat, and I'll capture it from there. And after all three panelists have gone through their questions, we will have a Q&A session. If you'd like to speak, then kindly go to your button and just raise your hand, and I'll capture it from there, and we'll have this discussion. We'll start at 7 and we stop at 8, and we're going to get started. So today we have three panelists, exciting gentlemen. Malaki, who's our president. I know you just chose me here to just have gender balance so that people don't say you are sexist, but this panel is a bit sexist. But anyway, we will take that up for another day. We're going to have this conversation on why do we have three entrepreneur representatives on this panel and not even one female representative, but I'm not going to cut that discussion today. To start with, we have George Tekwane Mwendwa. George, are you there? Please say hello to the people.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me for the panel. Just to briefly, am I meant to introduce myself now?
You can proceed, you can proceed, go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. So nice to be a part of the panel. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'm the founder of a company called Asilimia, where we're a fintech startup that in short is trying to make M-Pesa by finding alternative business models that don't necessarily charge the customer transaction fees. We've been in the business for 2 years. We're currently live on the Play Store, USSD, and hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll be having a web app as well. Yeah, and happy to be part of the panel again.
Karibu, George. Nice to hear from you. It's been a minute. Me and George have had various interactions, even in this particular space, and maybe he will choose to share what his journey on that front was. We also call him the adrenaline junkie. I don't know, do you still chase adrenaline, George?
Yeah, I think much worse than before. But yes.
Okay, great. Our second panelist this evening is Wilson Kamau. Karibu, Wilson. Salimia the people.
Thank you so much, Ivy. Thank you guys for having me on the panel. I think it's a pleasure. Truthfully, I've never been on many panels, so this is a sort of a first. I'm actually very glad. I'm a Rotarian of the club also. I'm a Rotarian from Madaraka. Professionally, I serve as CFO for Okolea International. Okolea briefly is a micro lender. We're an alternative lender. We offer micro loans through mobile app available on Google Play Store and also iOS. Basically offer small loans to businesses and consumers who need it for business purposes, working capital, or for emergency purposes. And it's sent straight to your mobile phone or your bank within seconds. That's pretty much about it, but I think we'll get more into it as we go along. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Wilson, and welcome again. And our last panelist for this evening is Sebastian Wichman. Wichman, did I pronounce it correctly?
That's perfect.
Great. Welcome, Sebastian. Kindly introduce yourself and say hello to the people.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ivy. Yeah, my name is Sebastian Wichman. I grew up in Nairobi, and maybe perhaps like some of the other people on this panel, I've done multiple things. I trained as a lawyer originally, English qualified lawyer. I came back to Kenya, where I set up a startup with a friend of mine in the taxi hailing business, and then went back to law, and later launched a pay-as-you-go solar company, and most recently have now switched to the investment side, where I work for Lendable. We're a fintech focused debt provider. So we provide growth capital for fintechs. This is everything from digital lenders to payment processors across Africa, and now most recently in Asia as well. Today, we've deployed about $50 million worth of capital, and hopefully doubling that number this year. And so I think I've seen everything. I've seen entrepreneurship from a startup perspective, but now also an investor perspective, and I've also worked as an advisor to businesses as well. So, but yeah, with most of my experience actually being in Kenya over the past 10 years.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Sebastian. Thank you so much for joining the panel. And we'll move right into it, and we'll start. My first question is going to go to George, right? George, karibu tena. Now, you are the founder of Asilimia, and it's been a journey for you. So my first question to you would be to kindly enlighten us on the two most difficult challenges you faced from the founding and getting started with Asilimia to where you are today, and how you overcame them. I'm sure every entrepreneur would like to share that, would just like to hear that it's all not a bed of roses, but hey, you can do this. So please go ahead.
It depends. For some, it's more of a bed of roses than others, but in regards to the challenges I've had, it's so I think what every other entrepreneur would say is capital, and in regards to fundraising more so for a tech startup. So basically, if I was a conventional business, maybe it would be much more easier, but I didn't choose an easier path by starting a tech startup in Kenya. And then the problem is that our business model was is slightly the opposite of what you do with, in the payment space. So we basically started out by saying we want to make M-Pesa free, and that's a very difficult story to sell. So how we've overcome that, have we? So basically, how last year I think was the first time we went after external investors. So for the last 2 years, we've been bootstrapping, and last year we took an intentional step to raise capital. That led to me leaving the country. Last year I was in Cape Town for 5 months. Now I'm in Europe. So solving my problem of capital or lack of capital in Kenya was basically to increase the number of rejections. So at least now I have more people to bother than previously before. It's fairly worked. So Cape Town, we got an investment offer of $350,000. Currently in Europe as well, we're having conversations with investors that have a bit more patient capital and a need to solve the problem that we're currently solving. So that would be one of the problems we've started with. So I don't know if you want me to go to the others, or you'd prefer.
Yes, just give me the two. I want a top two. What you'd say were your biggest challenges? The lack of capital, second one?
So the second one is human capital, but it's not in the context that a lot of people like. Kenya doesn't have qualified talent. We actually have overqualified talent. We have a lot of brilliant talent. The problem is, I always call it the black tax issue, right? So if you're a startup and you're going to employ a Kenyan, you can't give them shares. Don't work very well in terms of enticement, because it's never really the individual who just needs the money. It's that you'll find a very brilliant developer, business dev, but the issue is that they have their parents, they have their siblings to support, so they can't really take the risk and join a startup that can provide capital for the next 2 to 3 years consistently. So human capital in the context of getting early on brilliant talent in the beginning, that was very difficult in the start. How I solved the problem is that we've extended our hiring reach. So we basically tend to aggressively pursue individuals that come from the US, come from Europe. So at that particular point, point, they don't have the risk factor, they don't have the black tax, so they can commit 6 to 1 to 2 years of their lives without necessarily expecting market rates pay. And that's how basically I've been able to solve it. So we have a team that sits in Paris and the US, and then Kenya as well. So yeah, so reaching out to other jurisdictions for talent has been beneficial in making sure we don't have a talent gap in regards to high capacity individuals.
Great. And how has that been, particularly for Perception, when it comes to you being a Kenyan founded company, and when you come back home, or even in terms of them understanding the product? Because everyone, I mean, the African continent and, you know, Kenya as a market is totally different. So when you look at you getting human capital from overseas, how has that been for you? What has the experience been for you?
I think, so one of the biggest issues I tend to look out for is cultural fit. So basically ensuring that the talent that comes in is able to adapt to both the uniqueness of the market, consumer, and the talent. So my core talent is Kenyan. Senior tech is Kenyan. So basically I give them everybody who joins works under the core team, which has grown up in Kenya and knows the Kenyan problem. And that helps the transition. In regards to Perception, it's actually very different in the context of how they look at it. So most of the talent is attracted to Asilimia because of the impact, where we get individuals that have worked in top management consultancy companies for years, or top tech startups, and they're feeling lost. You know, so most of the time where they've worked for oil companies or companies they don't really agree to from a principal perspective. And as such, they're very happy to get the opportunity to do something that has a direct impact, where they see working in Asilimia has an impact on people's lives.
I like that. I like that. I also like when you said increase the number of rejections. It's more like the dating game, yeah? The more you put yourself out there, the more you get rejected. Eventually, you will hit on something.
Yes.
Great. My second question to you is based on statistics. So June 2020 statistics, the Google Play Store is said to have about almost 3 million apps. Apple Store has about 2 million apps. So we're looking at about 5 million apps altogether. So how do you, as an early stage entrepreneur, defend the valuation of your app Asilimia to an investor?
I think, one of the things I say we got right, or we got lucky with Asilimia, was that we solved a problem that customers actually had. So the best marketing is to have market product fit, right? So every time we tell individuals that if you use Asilimia, you're gonna pay less, or it's actually free to use to send M-Pesa, it strikes a nerve, right? So because our relationship with M-Pesa and money in Kenya is very different from what you have everywhere else, where every shilling counts, and M-Pesa transactions have an emotion attached to it. It's usually somebody sending money to their parents, sending to their friend who needs bailout, or somebody buying a product they feel that's going to kind of change their lives if they sell it. So how we stand out is just by purely hitting the nail on the head with the product and the problem. So we don't have an issue of standing out. Users find us. Word of mouth worked very well for us. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, George. I'm going to move on straight to Wilson. Wilson, good evening again.
Good evening.
Now, you're like, you play at the growth stage entrepreneur. And my first question to you is, in the fintech space, most so in microlending, you're getting a lot of attention from investors in the recent years, right? So the questions have been raised regarding the usage of funds by borrowers and the high interest rates charged by the microlenders. How have these concerns affected your fundraising in the last 1 year?
Okay, thanks so much. In terms of usage of funds, to be open, it can be quite hard to know what particular user will use the funds for. So once somebody borrows funds and the money is sent to his M-Pesa, he has what happens thereafter is quite hard to know. What we try to do is, before they borrow the money, we tend to ask the user to fill out a form and say this money is for this particular purpose, and that's how much we're able to analyze and just and to see how he's going to spend the money. But in the recent past, what we've been trying to do is go deeper and try to analyze the person even before they come and borrow. So what we do is we are able to know much about the customer by looking through his past M-Pesa information, see what he's been spending his money on. So we're able to, again, to weed out some people who might be using the money unwisely. So if you look at people who bet, they may not form a very good person to give money to, because they might use money improperly. Betting is not something that we encourage as a company. In terms of high interest rates, I think it's debatable. Let me say it's debatable. For us, we call it sort of it's a margin of business. It's a cost of doing business for us. For us to do business and to excel at what we do is that we get money at a very high cost. So we transfer that cost ideally back to the user, which it seems high compared to other financial institutions, but I think for us it's necessary, and given that it's also a very high risk, high return business. That's how we sort of justify it. In terms of how it has affected our cost of us getting money, for sure, we have had investors shy away when they see that you charge higher interest rate. There are people who compare you to payday lenders or Shylocks, which I think it's quite unfortunate, but has made some investors shy away from giving us money, which is sad. You said the funds comes as a question a lot of the times, like, how do you know what your customers using the money for? So what we do is the background checks before they actually get the money, and that's how we tell them, we justify to them that these funds are being utilized for this particular purpose. Yeah.
When you mention your background checks, tell me what has come out as the highest percentage of why people borrow in your database. What have you seen?
So majority, I'd say, is can I call it sort of like a salary advance? Let me put it that way. So we'd find people who borrow. Most of the borrowing happens between mid-month and end-month. So people are borrowing to fill the gap between the next salary. So that's the majority of people who borrow. And then we'll have now people who borrow for daily borrowing. There's like working capital borrowing. These are day traders who actually borrow to finance working capital and such kind of thing.
Okay, so those form the majority. Those two categories. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. And having gone on an investor roadshow, you've been on an investor fundraising roadshow, yeah? Tell us a bit about what are the key differences between fundraising abroad versus fundraising in Kenya?
I think biggest difference is what the investors are looking for. Kenyan investors, I'd say, we're looking for a return most of the time. It's like a direct return. So if I give you this amount of money, how much do I get back, and in what kind of period of time? What you say, people in the international market would actually want to work with you. Basically, it's maybe for the longer term. They're looking at more equity rather than maybe debt. So I'd say Kenyan investors would be looking for more as a return-based sort of investment that is actually immediate rather than a long-term sort of equity play.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've had from an early stage entrepreneur, we've had from a growth stage entrepreneur. Now we're going to talk to the investor side of things. Sebastian, good evening once again. Hello.
Good evening.
Great. Sebastian, this is my question to you, my first question to you. Investors have been coming up with innovative ways to conduct due diligence on potential investments, right? Some using analytics and others are using artificial intelligence. Could you let us know what the use of AI really means, or how it works, and how much this would translate into cost savings for both the investor and the borrower? I believe your company is one of those that is using AI at the moment. Could you kindly shed some light on that?
Yes, gladly, Ivy. Well, I think first from the outset, I would say perhaps AI is a term that's probably used quite freely or quite loosely these days. I think really at the end of the day, our investment approach relies on a hybrid of fundamental analysis and data analytics. So at the core of our underwriting still is always going to be this fundamental analysis. So, when we're looking at kind of some of the important things in underwriting, which is character and capacity to repay us, we look at the management team still. For us, it's always going to be important to see a team of managers that we believe that when it comes to a crisis, for example, like we've seen very evidently right now with COVID, for example, the type of borrowers that will proactively approach us and think about how to pay us, how to mitigate certain risks. And I especially in the context of the kind of ongoing financial crisis, I cannot underline how important good character is in terms of management. And no matter how much structure, you cannot mitigate for bad character. And that is still going to be, I think, going forward, it's been a great lesson for us. And secondly, of course, in terms of fundamental analysis, it will always come down to their ability to repay us, which is it's a financial analysis. When the last point though is the collateral, and for us as a lender, of course, we're just lending against receivables, a loan book, and it's cash that is dispersed, it's cash that's collected. In some cases, for example, with Okolea, I believe as well, these are short-term loans. Some of our clients have even just 24-hour loans, and they've give out hundreds of millions of 24-hour loans. So the question is, how do you as a lender understand your collateral? And that's where we've become very good. Lendable actually initially started off as a data analytics company. So we've just set up our template data ingestion, where the borrower just provides us all of their historical loan tape in a format that we understand, and we verify the performance of the portfolio. That is backward looking. Once we lend to a company, we set up a data integration where we ingest their loan tape data on a daily basis, evolution and current state of the loan book, and actually understand the value of our collateral on a daily basis. And once again, even in the current environment right now, it's been an extremely useful tool where on a daily basis, we understand whether people are repaying their loans, whether loan books are recovering now that the economies are reopening, or in fact, many of the times we're ahead of our customers, because even though they have pretty good internal systems, they are always focused on managing their business and looking at other things, whereas we are just purely looking at the loan book performance. So yeah, it's an incredibly useful tool, and it's essential for our business. We only ask that our clients have a 12-month track record in whichever product is. That is extremely early stage for a debt investor, and we wouldn't be able to invest this early in companies if we didn't have this technology.
Thank you, very informative. My next question to you is, Kenya has been seen to receive a large amount of funding from venture capitalists compared to other African countries. It has been said that the funding is skewed towards expatriates. In your opinion, how do you think this can be changed? Or do you think this is actually a true statement? Oh, so I'll bring it back to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think this is stuff that you generally do hear. And there's perhaps a grain of truth to this, but I can understand the perception is there, because if you go on LinkedIn or if you look in the newspaper, you'll always see the kind of more international startups, advertising their successes in fundraising. But it really depends what type of company we're talking about, really. So like you mentioned, Kenya, Nigeria probably have the highest inflow of VC money in Africa, but it's not all going to foreigners. If you look at some of the bigger fundraisers, Africa's Talking, Cellulant, Twiga, these are all Kenyan, great Kenyan tech companies that have raised money from people like Goldman Sachs. So it's not entirely true, but at the same time, we have to remember that Sub-Saharan Africa gets less than 1% of the global VC money. So it's going to be difficult for anybody to raise money in Sub-Saharan Africa, whether you're a foreign started one or if you're locally founded. It's always going to be more challenging in Africa. But if we look at, for example, later stage, kind of more private equity, led investments in the Kenyan space, it's pretty much mostly locally owned manufacturing services. If you look at Britam or Quickmart or Superfoam, Naivas, etc., these are all Kenyan companies. So it's really what I think the challenge we're looking at is. Also, I think George alluded to this, is pretty much for early stage companies. How do early stage companies raise money? And whether it's in the US or in Europe, people really rely on friends and family and seed stage investors to raise capital. And the fact of the matter is that there is less of that in the Kenyan market. And if there's a founder, or like an American founder here, he can always go back to a network of investors in the US, and there's a familiarity, there's trust, and it makes it easier. And like George said, you have to have at least 100 meetings to raise $1 million. So you need to have that. You need to be able to get that level of rejection first, until you become successful. You quickly run out of avenues in the Kenyan space. And the other fact, and also Wilson mentioned, is that Kenyan investors, high net worth individuals, are typically still looking for kind of cash generative investments, something super liquid, something that's driving immediate returns. It's very difficult to convince somebody. They're typically more risk averse and don't want to wait 5 to 7 years on a speculative type investment. They want to have liquidity. And that's obviously a major challenge. The good news, of course, is that there are locally based VCs that understand the environment. If you look at people like Energy Access Ventures, Nova, Star Park, AHL, there's a lot of locally based funds that understand the market and they are accessible. There are people in the kind of startup space like Antler who are, trying to create these links between entrepreneurs and international investors and, really shape the idea that is kind of becomes investor friendly. And I think at the end of the day, I think, there's probably a challenge perhaps even for the Rotary Club here to really create like a more formal network of angel investors and make it easier for, local entrepreneurs to understand who are the high net worth individuals, which are the groups that are actually willing to take equity risk in an early stage venture.
Great. Thank you so much. You kind of went very quickly when you talked about some of the local VCs that we have. So maybe what I'd request is on the side chat that you just sort of name some of them. If anyone is interested in looking into them or learning more about them, they can do their own research. So if you just list them down for us, I would really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, gladly.
Great. So this panel of mine has been like super efficient. I had 2 questions for everyone. They have gone through them. Now I'm just like, ooh, okay, we still have some good time. So you know what I'm going to do? I hand it over to the Rotary Club and all our guests. Now it's your turn to ask them the hard questions. This one's what kind of prepared for a little bit. So now over to you. You can either put up your hand and Muto and Malaki will be looking out for you and also help coordinate who can speak, or you can just type in your question and I'll ask it to them directly. So any questions to the panel, it can go to anyone, just say who you're directing it to and we will send it to them. Hello, questions, people? The panelists can ask each other questions too. George, you have direct access to Sebastian. Wilson, this is the time, shoot your shot. This is like, number 100 and number 1 of the rejections or acceptance.
Hi, Ivy.
Hi, Faye.
I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
And this is for the perception that Wilson has said about his product being viewed as a, what are they called? Those backdoor loan facilities. I don't know what it's
like a Shylock.
Yeah, Shylock.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
So, and it's not a Shylock, right? So,
no.
Yeah. So and there are several apps that provide the same service and product, right? So what effort or what have they done to like combat this perception? Because personally, I never thought of it as a Shylock, because I kind of understand how it works or operates. But now for the kawaida mwananchi, or not necessarily kawaida mwananchi, but just even for growth and for growth, the perception to allow the growth. So what effort has been done by such products?
Great, Wilson, over to you. That's your question.
Well, Faith, thank you so much for the question. There are a couple of things that we've done, and I know just to mention a few. One, as an industry, most of our players in the industry have changed their model of operations. Previously, we used to lend to people for a period of at least actually a minimum of 1 month, or actually even 5 days to 2 weeks to 1 week. So we changed that model. Now we lend to up to 2 months, minimum of 2 months actually to start. And you can lend and you can borrow up to a maximum of 6 to 12 months, depending on the size of the facility you're borrowing. So that really helped us come from that sort of perception that we are payday lenders. We basically want you to pay back with it. Every time you get paid or you get a salary, pay us back your money. That's a typical perception of how a payday lender would work. They're waiting for your next salary for them to get their money back. So us guys do take it further. We can borrow for a longer period or extended period of time. Another sort of aspect to it is in terms of even the interest rates that we charge. Ours vary. We charge from as low as 5% per month, which can be still high, up to 15% per month. But again, depending on your risk category. So if you're higher risk, you definitely pay more. Then look at another aspect to it is that as some of the members of the actually players in the industry formed a self-regulating organization called DLAC, the Digital Lenders Association of Kenya. So we check ourselves in terms of how we operate. And if you've seen a lot of back and forth with the CBK governor in terms of how we operate, and he's come out strongly against us. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that some of the operators in the industry were using very unscrupulous means for collection. You'd find an operator would call people's relatives to demand some loan be paid back, which is but puts a negative perception on the entire landscape. So we don't do that. Members of DLAC don't do that at all, and we really try to differentiate ourselves from such other players in the industry. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Wilson. Faith, are you happy with that response?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Joel, I see your hand is up. Kindly unmute and proceed.
Evening, everybody.
Hey, Joel.
How are you?
Very good.
Yeah. Now for Sebastian, why is it that most investors get amnesia in regards to young startups and ask for requirements that they themselves were unable to meet when they were starting out the business? Why do we get to that point where we forget where we started and try to demand more from people we want to invest in?
Well, yeah, look, I think it really depends in terms of what type of investor. So look, I think us as debt investors, perhaps, we do require more, but we typically invest after initial equity investors. So we do expect the company to have already gotten to that stage where it raises enough equity, which it can leverage with our debt. I do think though and I think that you make a very good point, because even when we approach companies, there's some things that we are must-haves, and then the other things that we understand are pretty much work in progress. So for us, when I say about our fundamental analysis, I think it is important, again, like the management is good, but that key systems like financial reporting are there. And that's one thing, for example, that would be non-negotiable. When it comes to other topics, like, we're not going to make demands in terms of, additional staff that needs to be hired or things that we see as non-core to our product. The things that we do see core to our product in terms of having positive unit economics, having good financial reporting, and being able to track your loan portfolio, know who your customers are, those things will be non-negotiable. For the rest of the other things, we do have a lot of understanding for our portfolio companies, and where we don't see it as kind of essential to tell the company, well, look, we just need to see an improvement on this side. But on the other hand, I think as an equity investor, if you were an early stage equity investor, of course, then I think people should have a lot more understanding, and they are also cognizant of the fact that they're taking much higher risk. As a debt provider, our upside is capped. We're not getting equity-like returns, so we have to see some of the key risks mitigated.
Joel?
Okay. I guess you have a point, but mine was more of a broader question, because I have a bit of experience with with startups and trying to look for funding. And every time you go to funding, the same questions appear in terms of your structure. You might not have a structure, because most of the times for these companies, it's you have your idea. Execution might not be through road X, it might be through road Y, Z, but somebody still wants it to go to road X, forgetting that they did not go through road X to get to the destination. So that's been my biggest challenge, because most investors tend to have amnesia. I'm sure if right now I went to Wilson and asked him to fund my small Juakali lending company, he would make me jump through hurdles that he used various tricks to bypass. Yeah. So for me, it's just, I think there needs to be that hand holding. Understand my problems are unique, but at the end of the day, if my vision is there, execution will vary. Yeah, I'm example, I'm not a very detailed person. I just want to see the highlights and bottom line. So now Wilson comes with a lot of in between, but I get your point.
Yeah.
But also,
but look, it makes sense, and I think we've gone through that journey ourselves. I mean, if I say Lendable started off as an analytics company and raised its first equity from investors as a data analytics company, and then pivoted when it realized that there was no money to be made in selling analytics services to companies in Africa and Asia, we decided to leverage that data and leverage that knowledge to become a lender. And the thing is that, of course, that's why it's incredibly important to find the right investors. You're always going to have investors that are going to tell you how to run your business. And sometimes they also end up on the board of your company, and you have to, take it for what it's worth. But the important thing is, of course, you're going to have to find the right fit for you, whether that's a type of investor that is just purely looking for financial returns and wants to see the bottom line, or whether it's a type of investor that wants to see a great vision that, and they're going to ask you questions about when are you going to expand to Nigeria, and it's really, there's a whole spectrum of people, and it's just a question of really finding the right one for you.
On that same note, I'm going to go to the messages because Sissy has asked a question which is almost related to what we're discussing right now, and it can be taken by any one of you. Can the panelists speak to the importance of being internally organized as a business, systems, processes, a solid strategy for the future? The investors I speak to say what often makes them get cold feet is when they see the internal workings of the business are chaotic. How can businesses get investor ready from early on? So this is where Joel said, he's not a very detailed person. So does someone want to speak to that? Maybe George, also the next question was directly to you, George. Yes. Was how long did it take to get where his business is in terms of access to foreign investors and maturity of product and processes? Is it realistic to have a defined period of at least 5 years before getting there? So maybe you can touch on how can businesses get investor ready, because that's the journey you are on right now, and also just tell us how realistic it is to have a defined period of, say, 5 years before you get to where you are. So I'd ask you to answer both the questions, and any of the other panelists can talk about how the businesses can get investor ready. But let me start with George.
Okay, cool. Very interesting question, because that's something I think a lot of investors, to start with Sissy. Yes, so I think there's always the blanket response that investors will always give you, not to give you money, unfortunately. So they'll start with the logical and then move to very many other reasons, right? So it's like applying for a job where you're told you need to have 5 years worth of working experience, but it's an entry-level job. So how have come to, so based on my own experience, I think first of all, investment is very nuanceical, or it's very localized depending on the investors that you're talking to. So investors in Europe are very paper heavy, so they care more about due diligence than how big the idea is. or the traction. So they care about, do you have your employee contract set out? Do you have, any other documents around legislation or regulation? Do you have anything you say you've done or doing? Do you have a paper trail of it? And they'll focus on that more than, the opportunity in itself. If you talk to American investors, they care about how big the idea can be, right? And if you satisfy that, they're willing to give you capital at whatever stage of business you're in, where they're willing to bet on the founder more than do you have processes set out? A lot of AI or ML companies start out with actual human beings behind the computer doing the process management. But it's not the question of where you are, it's where you're going to go to, right? And if you're able to express your idea in that way, in the visionary perspective, then you attract an American investor. When it comes to African investors, and I'll use an example of Nigeria and Kenya. In Nigeria, my friends raise capital without a pitch deck, without papers. They don't even know the investor, right? This is not even them knowing each other. It's because he's a local investor. There are things he understands intuitively that if you're an entrepreneur that talks about the intuition, right? It's not data heavy. It's just a question of the investor was born and brought up in Nigeria, or he was born and brought up in Kenya, and he has always felt this is a problem. He never really knew how to solve the problem, but you as an entrepreneur, you seem to have some idea to it, then they'll give you investment. So in Kenya as well, where there are Kenyan entrepreneurs, they barely have the experience as startup entrepreneurs. They didn't exit before, they don't have an MBA, they don't have processes, but they meet a Kenyan who's grown up in Kenya and has a little bit more capital and understands what they're talking about. So I think for that question, it depends on which investors you're talking about. And as an entrepreneur, you should always pick your investors based on what you can provide at that particular point in time. Because also because processes slow down progress as an entrepreneur, because some things are quick fixes, you need to scale very quickly, you need to go to the customer as fast as you can. So if you focus on building processes that Safaricom has done for years on your first year of business, and you might not survive for 2 years, then you're misaligning your priorities. So always choose your investors based on what you think you can provide in the beginning. If you're ex-corporate Kenya or ex-corporate, or you've just done your MBA, so you know how to do processes like the back of your hand, start doing that, then sell that to an investor who's interested in it. But if you're learning on the job, then pick your investors as per that. So I don't know if I've answered that, but it's not important. What it is important is which investor you're going for. And the investor that you go for will understand why you have those processes or you don't have.
Thank you. Nick, you have a question for Wilson, but you didn't post the question. Would you like to ask it out? Oh, there it appears. Okay, Wilson, this is from Nick to you. Regarding your cap raises, how would an ordinary person buy in or sort of invest in your business? Or is the target mostly big money investors? And if possible, what are the returns?
Nick, thank you so much for your question. Just to point out, as we talked about earlier, investors in Kenya would look for returns, which is, as you say, there's no definite answer to what return you would get. So it's if you're doing an equity play, it's a gamble. You basically buy into the company with the risks and the rewards that will come out of it. So there's no definite answer to the returns that somebody would get. In terms of if an ordinary person to get into the business, it's possible. What you do is just approach for a conversation. It's that simple. So it's just to touch with the conversation, see where you are aligned in terms of investments, and something we can walk you through, and we see whether we can fit together. So what we do, if, for example, if you want to actually buy into equity, we have to sort of vet the person that's coming through to make sure that we are aligned in terms of our goals. So we don't want somebody who wants to go X direction and us guys want to go Y direction. So that's very important. So we need to have a sit down and actually chat and get to know one another better, in a sense. Yeah. We don't really target more big money investors. We have a lot of investors. Our biggest investment is actually debt, and it comes in varied forms. So we have very low value debt, and we have high value debt. That's we have every sort of investor you might think about. Yeah.
Thank you, Wilson. Nick, you have your answer. Talk to Wilson, hit him up on the side, get to know him, get to talk to him, and see if you could do business together. There might be an opportunity there. Josh, your hand is up. Please proceed.
Thank you, Ivy. My question is, well, a little different from the discussion today. I'm thinking now from the other side, those of us who are probably working for the big companies and other startups. If you are thinking of taking a jump from that, or you have been, courted by a startup, how does one, and maybe even Ivy can help answer this, how does one, look at if the startup is gonna, is there for the long run, or is it just something that's gonna be there for 6 months, or is it just simply high risk, high return? If you're to, gauge or look at a startup and say, is it, I don't know, a fit for me, and do I see myself growing with it in the next 1-2 years? How does someone look, to know how to gauge a startup, whether it's, there for the long haul, it's simply, I don't call it a non-starter, but, a struggling one. Yeah.
Who would like to take up that question?
Maybe I can give a try, since I'm always trying to poach talent, and I've had mixed responses and mixed experiences with different caliber of talent. I think it's always a question of assessing your work character as a person who wants to join a startup. So do you like to be in a situation where first of all, you like lack of structure, where if you're coming from a corporate structure where the first day of business, you're given a manual, a handbook, and told, this is how we do things, right? And this is your specific role, and this is the specific thing we need you to do. So if you like that, some startups are not able to provide you that. And especially if they're either hyper growth, series A, seed, it will be things change every day, depending on how quickly they're growing or depending on their product. The other thing is about capital raised. So you need to always have an honest conversation with a startup. Have they actually raised money, or are they hiring you as leverage to raise capital? And if that doesn't happen, then that's where you find you're not able to get the returns that you're looking for in terms of expected remuneration. Then I think the other thing is about, is there work to be done, right? So a lot of startups, sometimes we hedge on talent. We bring you on board even before work is there. So we feel that you're a good person for sales, but there's no selling that is going on currently in the company. So they can pay you, yes. The company has potential, but in the meantime, there's nothing really to be done around your skill set. So most of the times, what I do, if I find individuals that are looking to shift from corporate to startup and they're interested in my startup in particular, I have to make assessment of those three things. And then either sometimes the relationship starts as advisory, where you're like, okay, we can work together as the talent being an advisory to the startup, as we kind of get to the 3 touch points I've had, where we have raised enough capital so I can guarantee 2 to 3 years of consistent pay. Or we've gotten to the point where now we have a big client, so we need somebody to manage that client, or we have enough scale that there's activity to manage, and we can also bring on board other talent to work together with you to make you efficient.
Josh?
Very, very good points there, George. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to take 3 more questions. So I have one on chat from EMW. I want to assume that's, I don't know, I think it's Emma. And then Faith has her hand up again, and we have Njiri and Njiri. That's going to be it for the day. So from EMW, from the panelist experience, how has the capital fundraising landscape changed, and what has informed that change? We've sort of touched a bit on this, but you could just do a quick run through. From an investor perspective, how are investors making this process more inclusive for Kenyan startups? Again, Sebastian also touched a bit on this, but you could just give us just like a summary overview for the sake of EMW. Then I'm going to have Njiri take the floor, and then Faith can ask the other question. So let's start with, from the panelist experience, how has the capital fundraising landscape changed, and what has informed that change? What changes have you seen? Wilson, George, either one of you can take that question.
Let me just highlight something small I've seen that I think that has happened over the past few years. A lot of current investment are what we call social investment or social impacted investments. So what is happening is that people are investing not per se for the business itself, but for the cause that the business is undertaking. So you'd find that you would get more investment in terms of renewable energy, because it's driving people away from fossil fuel and stuff. So that's a lot of investment is in that direction. So if you have an investment that has a social impact, you stand a better chance currently in terms of getting funding. And there's a pool of people who have money, investors that have money to do in that space. You have family offices. These are high net worth individuals with investments which can do who can give you investments in terms of equity or debt for your venture. So, and you can find them there, and they're all over. And they actually seek out people in that space. One place you can actually find them is there's a forum called Sun Club that happens once a year. I think last time, because it didn't happen because of COVID, but it happens every year. It's a very, very useful forum to go if you are if you have a socially driven venture.
Great. Sebastian, do you want to touch on
Yes, absolutely.
the perspective and making it more inclusive for Kenyan startups?
Well, look, I think just talking about generally the development of the fundraising landscape, I've been able to observe this over the past 10 years, and it's incredible what has happened in this space. 10 years ago, there was no venture capital fund based here. The first incubators started maybe 8 years ago, 7 years ago. And there was absolutely nowhere to go to turn to if you want to raise capital. That was the challenge I faced in my first startup. There was hardly a person that you could even speak to that, look at this, the fact that this conversation is happening at the Rotary Club and you're able to get panelists that have experience, somebody sitting in Europe, somebody sitting here, is already testament to the fact that things are really moving in the right direction. You have, in the old days, you'd write an email to a VC fund based in Dubai. Today, you have people with representative offices here. You can go speak to people in the market incredibly well, and also local Kenyan investors, so high net worth individuals, etc. They're getting in the game now as well. So I think, generally speaking, we're moving in the right direction. I know everybody wants to have everything right now, but looking back over the past 10 years, the Kenyan fundraising landscape has really developed in all manners, whether we're talking about early or late stage debt, equity, social impact, or just pure financially driven incubators and all kinds of things. There, it's generally moving the right direction, and it is inclusive and will continue to be more inclusive as people get more comfortable with the risks.
Thanks, Sebastian. There's a question, since we're still talking about, and maybe this is to George as well. Seed stage startups are advised to find friends and families. What if you don't have deep-pocketed friends and family?
Yeah. Sorry. No, I think to some extent, I always find that to be almost laughable in the Kenyan context, not because that it's completely impossible, it depends on your network, but we don't have enough patient capital. So we have capital, right? Sorry.
Hello, George?
Sorry about that. I just started getting calls on the phone. Hello? Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
Hello? Sorry.
Hello?
So we
We
do
hear
have
you now.
capital, but the patient capital does not exist to either confidently as an entrepreneur to ask for the capital from your friends and family. So that doesn't necessarily exist in Kenya in the context that the first book was written in regards to investment as it happens in Europe or in the US, where you can easily find family or friends who don't necessarily need, okay, they do need their savings, but not in the context in Kenya where there's a lot of people who have money, but there's a lot of dependence as well around that capital. So their risk appetite is a little bit less. So that one so it exists, but only if you have businesses that are like Wilson, as mentioned, where you can do debt and quick return, or conventional businesses, schools, real estate, farming. But for the tech space, that doesn't exist as much. So then now you have to be creative around that gap, where it's either you have multiple side hustles that fund it, or you have a full-time job and just kind of gradually invest in your startup until the point it can receive a proper seed round. Because there's two stages. There's a pre-seed and then there's a seed. And in Kenya, seed tends to be seen as Series A. So until you can get your startup to a point of Series A, that's where there's a lot more capital to kind of accelerate you or to be infused into the company.
Okay. George, I think there's a question that you sort of breezed through. Hezbon had asked, how long did it take you to get to where your business is, and is it realistic to have the defined period of 5 years before getting there? Did you touch on that?
I think in the Kenyan context, you can't really take the global or Silicon Valley or the Western terms of how old a startup should be before they break even. So there's always the 5-year, 10-year. There's multiple stages: seed, Series A, B, C, and then IPO. I think for the Kenyan ecosystem, that doesn't exist, because it might take you 5 years to actually be a Series A startup, because you're starved of two things that are very important in the beginning, which is capital and human capital. And human capital tends to be very, very important in the early stage, more than capital. So you find that a lot of Kenyan entrepreneurs don't start their businesses with their peers, because you'll find one Kenyan, he's brilliant, he has seen an opportunity in the market, but the friends who could work with him on the idea, that have the skills to be hired by Safaricom, PwC, cannot necessarily quit their jobs and join him. And he can't start with a team of 5 overly qualified co-founders or colleagues, and that starves the growth. So maybe at the 5th year or the 3rd year is where you're actually on your year 1 as a Kenyan startup. If you just oppose that to a European startup that starts with $1 million as pre-seed or seed for 500,000, and they have the friends or employees who are just passionate about joining a startup at the early stage and getting shares. So I think what I would advise is, don't use the timeline that you'd read on a conventional business book written for businesses abroad. You have to just benchmark yourself and say, okay, how long will it take you to actualize either the milestones that you consider important, whether it's customers, partnerships, talent, and capital. For me, it's been 2 years of bootstrapping, because we had a problem of I needed to get the market product fit. And so I slowed down my fundraising until I was sure we have a product that if we put money into it, then it will just scale up.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Good inputs there. Santa Maria says very true and very accurate. I would like, Njeri, could you go ahead? And as he does that, Wilson and Sebastian, kindly have a look at the chat. There's some questions directed to you. So maybe you could respond to that there in the interest of time, please. Njeri, go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Ivy. Let me first appreciate the panelists for making time to give us the insights about startups. My question is, I just want to understand the role that strategy plays, and not just strategy, but even, there's a lot of documentation when you're pitching, when you're, when you're trying to set up a startup, you're told have the business plan, have a strategic plan. So what role do all these documents play in terms of performance, in terms of, monitoring and evaluating the performance of your strategies and your goals, ensuring that actually there is value for both the investor and the consumer, or, the people who consume these products and services. So what role do they play, and do they help in any way? Thank you.
Njeri, sorry, who had you directed your question to, or was it to anyone?
It's to anyone. Anyone can answer.
Okay, anyone from the panel wants to take up that question?
Well, I'm happy to start, and I think then probably the startup experience is probably quite useful in that. From an investor perspective, I think one thing is, like, we've been around for 5 years. We've done around $50 million so far. We are in due diligence right now with our investors. We are still, even though we can show track record, even though we can show all kinds of documentation, even us, we have to produce a lot of stuff. Process documents were mentioned, or, certain return calculations or strategy documents. It's one of those things is that you're just not going to get around. And really, if you're averse to producing documentation, it's probably not going to make, it's going to make your journey that little bit more difficult for sure. So, and I think previously as well, we were discussing processes, but at the end of the day, when we're looking for process documentation from a company, it's not because, the company will be producing those documents just for us, but it is definitely a sign. If the company knows, how to scale its product, it has to replicate something over and over again. It should be very simple for the company to demonstrate what those processes and those products are. So, at least, so yeah. And so when you say documentation, it's like, yes, it is important, and it's something that we do look at our investee companies. We do place a lot of value on that. Of course, we're happy to look at all the soft elements and all the story, but it is important, and it has to be produced. And we understand from our own perspective that it is painful sometimes as we go through it ourselves.
Njeri?
Yeah, I appreciate the answer, and actually it goes hand to actually validate what has been said about documentation.
Great. Thank you. So I have Faith, who has had her hand up for a long time. Faith, I'll take one final question from you as I just go quickly through what's left on the chats, and I'm going to close it in the next 5 minutes.
Thanks, Ivy. I have a question for all the three, or whoever who feels like they can, or whoever feels like they can chip in. One, so I'll pick out things that all of you have mentioned. So Sebastian, for example, you have said that you've been in this space for 10 years. So in the 10 years, and you've mentioned that for every 100 investors you meet, you get a lot of rejection, and maybe only one gives you the time of day and maybe has some belief in you, right? And then secondly, for what's his name, Tekwane, you have said that he had to wait for 2 years for he had to wait and have everything right on for himself to feel confident enough to take it, to move forward, right? So okay, fine. So personally, the common thing I find is that you can have everything right on paper. You can have all your numbers right. You can have all your projections right. You can have your market research and everything. You have everything right, your business plan and all that stuff. But the situation on the ground can be different, right? So my question is, and there's someone else who's asked a question about this, what else, apart from having everything on paper looking good, what else in spite of the fact that you will face a lot of rejection, you will face a lot of challenges, what organic thing that is not on the papers it contributes to the success of your product, or even you as an individual, because you can have all the systems and processes right, and that has happened before, but still things still fail, right? So that is my question. What other thing that have you learned in all your time in this space and in your experience, apart from having everything else right on paper, processes, systems, and all that stuff, that you can say actually is a contributing factor to the success of your product? That is my question. Thank you.
Gentlemen?
Anybody want to take that? I'm happy to just start off again, just briefly. I'll just say, like, I'm assuming that you...
Sebastian, as you take it up, there's a similar question. There's an addition to that question. So sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but there's something asked directly to you. As an investor, you can have all the due diligence done. What is your greatest lesson learned over the years? So I think it ties in both ways as you answer what Faith has just asked, and if you can answer it also from an investor point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Faith's earlier questions, I didn't get whether this is, if you, beyond having all the documentation ready, I assume that the product is launched, because I mean, of course, at some level you would want to see the kind of the resonance from the market clearly, whether your customers are taking it up. If we're talking about a kind of pre-revenue pitch, or then I suppose it's, if it's pre-revenue, what else would you look at? I mean, very difficult. Post-revenue, of course, if there's resonance in the market and your customers love the product, that's the most important thing. If you were an investor and you went to the field and you spoke to your customers and they said they absolutely love your product, that would be the kind of non-paper, non-documentation type validation that you would probably look for. And the second thing, I suppose, when looking at the entrepreneurs, that very clearly whether this is an entrepreneur really by choice or by conviction, or an entrepreneur by necessity, who is just running the business to make a few extra bucks, and this is one of multiple things, or is it somebody that is really willing to dedicate his life, or to work 24/7 to achieving this dream? And I think those are things that you probably will only be able to tell once you meet the entrepreneur or the customer in person. I don't know if
yeah, thanks, Sebastian.
George.
Yes, Sebastian, I have understood everything you've said, but my question is, what have you learned from all that you have said as a person, as an entrepreneur, for business success? That is the question.
I think one thing that I've learned from all of our investees, and one thing again that goes to the character of all the people we met, is one is like the persistence and the 100% dedication that they have to their business, and that is something that you can tell. Like even if we're doing something like due diligence, you can see how involved, how passionate, and how much they want that money, how much they want that success for their business, and how much they believe in themselves and the company and the people that they work with.
Okay. Thank you. Wilson?
Okay, perfect. Very good question. And I like to echo what Sebastian just said. I think the drive of the entrepreneur or the founder is very important. And actually, when investors when they come for due diligence, they're actually looking through your records, and they're gauging you as an individual, as an entrepreneur. They're actually assessing you in terms of your qualities. Are you able to lead a team? Are you able to do what you set out to do? Do you have the drive to actually keep on doing it in case even if you don't get the investment? Will you still persist and go on with whatever you want to do? Do you actually feel your business that much? It's very, very important. Also, for me, I think, I don't know, just to say, is think of investments that come to your business as secondary. They're not your primary source of actual capital. That's the secondary sort of option. Think of it as do your business, scale your business start with organically if you can. To start that way. does whatever you're doing, does it have a business case? Are you in it are you in it to make profit, or are you just in it to get money from investors because your business seems right? So do your business and make sure it's profitable. Do it right from the get-go, so that if you're looking for investment, those are secondary sources of capital that will enable you scale. As you say, we're always in business to earn profit, and those profits are flowed back to the business to make it able to grow further.
Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. And I am now going to end up because we are at 8:08. I have exceeded my time by about 8 minutes. But Bonnie had a very nice comment, and I think he wanted to say something to George and Wilson. He wished them, let me just read it verbatim, wish you the best in your journey and challenge is champion, mentorship program for the young Kenyans and especially in the interactors and rotaractors. Bonnie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
yes,
please proceed before this is the last question that I'm taking for the evening.
Basically, it's a challenge to the two entrepreneurs, George and Wilson, to carry on the mentorship program to the young interactors. As a club, I think part of the core is education, and I think we can champion that through the two entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurs of the club. And mine is to wish you the best, and we're willing to support in whatever call you might need. Thank you.
Great. So sorry, Wilson?
No, I'm saying just thank you. Thank you for that, Bonnie, and we'll definitely take it up as a challenge. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to ask each of our three panelists to just give us, one parting shot, and then I'm going to summarize the whole conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Wilson, because you're already on screen. Please give us your parting shot for the night.
I think, let me say this, being an entrepreneur is not a better process. It's quite challenging. I have to give my hats off to George Tekwane. I think I have seen George grow. Let me say that. I think not knowing his story, you would not know where George has come from. George has gone hungry for days. I swear. I think that's a testament to what you can achieve if you keep at it. So don't and also for any budding entrepreneur, the single best thing you can do for yourself is to start small. Don't worry about how the business looks when it's small. Just start small and scale from there. It's worth it at the end of the day. Yeah.
Great. Sebastian? Thank you, Wilson. That's a great parting shot. Very encouraging. Sebastian?
Yes, I mean, I would also just echo the same and said that, that this entrepreneurship journey, I mean, entrepreneurship is a very widely used term in Kenya. And I think it's really, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, but you have to be ready to make those sacrifices. And there is no time limit on how long you have to make these sacrifices. Maybe you get your big break after 6 months, a year, 2 years, it might be 5 years. But if you really believe in your product and you're circumspect and your product actually makes sense, you will find that resonance eventually. It is difficult. I think there's lots of investors like ourselves and other people in different stages that really just want to support great businesses. So if your person has a great business, you will land on a branch, eventually.
Great parting shot, Sebastian. George, are you still with us? Thank you, Sebastian.
Yes. I'm still here.
Great. Can we have your parting shots, please?
Thank you, Ray Wilson, for your kind words. But I think what I like to say, and this is just my parting shot, is also in regards to what Faith had asked. I think the most important aspect of a business for success, it's not about the founder. I do the easiest bit, which is I always joke that I sell bullshit and bad jokes, but it's always your team. So for me, it's always been every single individual that I've worked with. The success and the failure of any big business, if you look back at it, it will always be the team. So when you're going through this journey of entrepreneurship, I think always focus on listening to your team and your customer and everybody else's details. And and I would recommend, not a book, but there's the movie for the founder of McDonald's. It shows the journey of an entrepreneur where he did multiple businesses, failed in so many, and by the time he found McDonald's, or he was able to become a success, it was the talent that he met that told him only one major important thing that turned around how he did his business and his success. So as a parting shot, focus on team, find it, beg it. If capital should be the thing that you look, investment should be the thing that you find last, talent should be the thing that you look for at all times. So when you're thinking about an idea, see how you can find multiple people to work with to help you refine your idea, execute it, and you are guaranteed success. If not success, lastly, it will be, you might find your next big idea. Slack was a product they used in the office to communicate with the engineers. The first idea they worked on failed. And when they're looking to shut down the company, they realized that build an internal communication platform that could be used by other people. And that just came from the talent. So the founder comes last, the investor comes last, it's the team and the customer. And if you listen to those two, then success is guaranteed.
Thank you, George. Thank you so much. My parting shot, first it's to thank the gentleman because you've been an absolutely fantastic panel to work with, to the team and to all the attendants. You've been a great audience. Your questions have been engaging. Thank you so much. I'd ask the three panelists to please go to the chat and just have a look. If I did miss out any, I tried to capture everybody's questions and comments, but if I did miss anyone's questions, I apologize for that. Sebastian, Wilson, George, go have a look, and if there's something you feel was not covered, kindly engage in a private chat with whoever asked the question as we do the final formalities of the Rotary Day. My takeouts from this, starting with Wilson's, was investments are secondary, scale your business organically, and that was great. George, I loved when you said increase your number of rejections, because out of it, it's like, when you reach for the stars or the sky, one of them, you'll touch the other. I don't know, I'm confused on that one. Sebastian, you said good character counts. Some of the small things we don't think about, keep it clean, have integrity, do your business with ethics, and it's going to pay off. So good character counts. I really like that as well. And for me, something that always goes with me, and to all you entrepreneurs and everybody who's doing or, trying to get through this COVID period and trying to get through life, it's not what lies behind us or what lies before us that counts, but what lies within us. So take that with you, feel encouraged, and, keep doing what you're doing. To everyone, Asante Sana, it's been a great evening. I'm going to hand it over to my president, Mr. Sami Malaki. Thank you for having me as your moderator this evening.